Abbreviator, plural abbreviators in English or abbreviators in Latin, also called breviators, were a body of writers in the papal chancery, whose business was to sketch out and prepare in due form the Pope's bulls, briefs and consistorial decrees before these are written out in extenso by the scriptores. They are first mentioned in the papal bulls Extravagantes of Pope John XXII and of Pope Benedict XII. After the protonotaries left the sketching of the minutes to the abbreviators, those to Parco majori, who ranked as prelates, were the most important officers of the apostolic chancery. By the time of Pope Martin V, the signature was made essential to the validity of the acts of the chancery, and they obtained in course of time many important privileges. Roman lay origin. Abbreviators are those who make an abridgment or abstract of a long writing a discourse by contracting the parts, i.e., the words and sentences, an abbreviated form of writing common among the Romans. Abbreviations were of two kinds: the use of a single letter for a single word, the use of a sign, note, or mark for a word or phrase. The Emperor Justinian forbade the use of abbreviations in the compilation of the digests, and afterwards extended his prohibition to all other writings. This prohibition was not universally obeyed. The abbreviators found it to their own convenience and interest to use the abbreviated form, and especially was this the case at Rome. The early Christians practiced the abbreviated mode, no doubt as an easy and safe way of communicating with one another and safeguarding the secrets from enemies and false brethren. Ecclesiastical abbreviators. In course of time, the apostolic chancery adopted this mode of writing as the curial style, still further abridging by omitting the diphthongs a and o, and likewise all lines and marks of punctuation. The ecclesiastical abbreviators were officials of the Holy See, among the principal officials of the apostolic chancery, which is one of the oldest and most important offices in the Roman Curia. The scope of its labor, as well as the number of its officials, has varied with the times. Up to the 12th or 13th century, the duty of the apostolic, or Roman, chancery was to prepare and expedite the pontifical letters and writs for collation of church dignities and other matters of grave importance which were discussed and decided in consistory. About the 13th or 14th century, the popes, then residing at Avignon in France, began to reserve the collation of a great many benefices, so that all the benefices, especially the greater ones, were to be conferred through the Roman Curia. As a consequence, the labor was immensely augmented, and the number of abbreviators necessarily increased. To regulate the proper expedition of these reserved benefices, Pope John XXII instituted the rules of chancery to determine the competency and mode of procedure of the chancery. Afterwards, the establishment of the datriere and the secretariat of briefs lightened the work of the chancery and led to a reduction in the number of abbreviators. According to Ciampini, the institution of curial abbreviators was very ancient, succeeding after the persecutions to the notaries who recorded the acts of the martyrs. Other authors reject this early institution and ascribe it to Pope John XXII. It is certain that he uses the name abbreviators, but speaks as if they had existed before his time, and had, by overtaxation for the labor, caused much complaint and protest. He prescribes the work, determines how much they may charge for the labor, fixes a certain tax for an abstract or abridgment of 25 words, or their equivalent, 150 letters, forbids them to charge more, even though the abstract goes over 25 words but less than 50 words, enacts that the basis of the tax is the labor employed in writing, expediting, etc. the bulls, and by no means the emoluments accruing to the recipient of the favor or benefice conferred by the bull, and declares that whoever shall charge more than the tax fixed by him shall be suspended for 6 months from office, and upon a second violation of the law shall be deprived of it altogether, and if the delinquent be an abbreviator, he shall be excommunicated. Should a large letter have to be rewritten, owing to the inexact copy of the abbreviator, the abbreviator and not the receiver of the bull must pay the extra charge for the extra labor to the apostolic writer. Whatever may be the date of the institution of the office of abbreviator, it is certain that it became of greater importance and more highly privileged upon its erection into a college of prelates. Pope Martin V fixed the manner for their examination and approbation, and also the tax they should demand for the labor and a punishment for overcharge. He also assigned to them certain emoluments. The abbreviators of the lower or lesser were to be promoted to the higher or greater bar of presidency. Their offices were compatible with other offices, i.e., they can hold two benefices or offices at one and the same time, some conferred by the Cardinal Vice-Chancellor, others by the Pope. Erection into a college of prelates. In the pontificate of Pius II, the number, which had been fixed at 24, had overgrown to such an extent as to diminish considerably the individual remuneration, and, as a consequence, able and competent men no longer sought the office, and hence the old style of writing and expediting the bulls was no longer used, to the great injury of justice, the interested parties, and the dignity of the Holy See. To remedy this and to restore the old established chancery style, the Pope selected out of the many then living abbreviators 70, and formed them into a college of prelates, and decreed that their office should be perpetual, that certain emoluments should be attached to it, and granted certain privileges to the possessors of the same. He ordained further that some should be called abbreviators of the upper bar, according to the proximity of the seats to that of the Vice-Chancellor, the others of the lower bar, that the former should sit upon a slightly raised portion of the chamber, separated from the rest of the hall, a chamber by lattice work, assist the Cardinal Vice-Chancellor, subscribe the letters and have the principal part in examining, revising, and expediting the apostolic letters to be issued with a leaden seal, that the latter, however, should sit among the apostolic writers upon benches in the lower part of the chamber, and the duty was to carry the signed schedules as supplications to the prelates of the upper bar. Then one of the prelates of the upper bar made an abstract, and another prelate of the same bar revised it. Prelates of the upper bar formed a quasi-tribunal, in which as a college they decided all doubts that might arise about the form and quality of the letters, of the clauses and decrees to be adjoined to the apostolic letters, and sometimes about the payment of the emoluments and other contingencies. Their opinion about questions concerning chancery business was held in the highest estimation by all the Roman tribunals. Pope Paul II suppressed this college, but Sixtus IV re-established it. He appointed 72 abbreviators, of whom 12 were of the upper or greater, and 22 of the lower or lesser presidency, and 38 examiners on first appearance of letters. They were bound to be in attendance on certain days under penalty of fine, and sign letters and diplomas. Ciampini mentions the decree of the Vice-Chancellor by which absentees were mulcted in the loss of the share of the emoluments of the following chancery session. The same Pope also granted many privileges to the College of Abbreviators, but especially to the members of the Greater Presidency. Pius VII suppressed many of the chancery offices, and so the Tribunal of Correctors and the Abbreviators of the Lower Presidency disappeared. Of the Tribunal of Correctors, a substitute corrector alone remains. Buick's chronicles the suppression of the Lower Presidency and puts the number of abbreviators at that date at 11. The present college consists of 17 prelates, 6 substitutes, and 1 sub-substitute, all of whom, except the prelates, may be clerics or laymen. Although the duty of abbreviators was originally to make abstracts and abridgments of the apostolic letters, diplomas, etc., using the legal abbreviations, clauses, and formularies. In course of time, as their office grew in importance, they delegated a part of their office to the substitute and confined themselves to overseeing the proper expedition of the apostolic letters. Prior to the year 1878, all apostolic letters and briefs requiring for the validity the leaden seal were engrossed upon rough parchment and in Gothic characters without lines, or diphthongs, or marks of punctuation. Bulls engrossed on a different parchment, or in different characters with lines and punctuation marks, or without the accustomed abbreviations, clauses, and formularies, would be rejected as spurious. Pope Leo XIII ordained that they should be written henceforth in ordinary Latin characters upon ordinary parchment, and that no abbreviations should be used except those easily understood. Titles and privileges. Many great privileges were conferred upon abbreviators in the past. By decree of Pope Leo X, they were created papal nobles, ranking as comes palatinus, familiars and members of the papal household, so that they might enjoy all the privileges of domestic prelates and of prelates in actual attendance on the Pope. As regards plurality of benefices as well as expectives, they and their clerics and the properties were exempt from all jurisdiction except the immediate jurisdiction of the Pope, and they were not subject to the judgments of the auditor of causes, or to the cardinal vicar. He also empowered them to confer the degree of doctor, with all university privileges, create notaries, legitimize children so as to make them eligible to receive benefices vacated by the fathers, also to ennoble 3 persons and to make knights of the order of St. Sylvester, the same to enjoy and to wear the insignia of nobility. Pope Gregory XVI rescinded this privilege and reserved to the Pope the right of creation of such knights. Pope Paul V, who in early manhood was a member of the college, made them referendaries of favors, and after 3 years of service, referendaries of justice, enjoying the privileges of referendaries and permitting one to assist in the signatures before the Pope, giving all a right to a portion in the papal palace and exempting them from the registration of favors as required by Pius IV with regard to matters pertaining to the apostolic chamber. They followed immediately after the 12 voting members of the signature in capella. Abbreviators of the greater presidency were permitted to wear the purple cassock and cappa, as also roche in capella. Abbreviators of the lower presidency before the suppression were simple clerics, and according to permission granted by Sixtus IV might be even married men, these offices becoming vacant by death of the abbreviator, no matter where the death take place, are reserved in curia. The prelates could resign their office in favor of others. Formerly these offices as well as those of the other chancery offices from the regent down were occasions of venality, until popes, especially Benedict XIV and Pius VII, gradually abolished that. Pope Leo XIII most solemnly decreed the abolition of all venality in the transfer or collation of the said offices. As domestic prelates, prelates of the Roman court, they had personal preeminence in every diocese of the world. They were addressed as Reverendissimus, Right Reverend, and Monsignor. As prelates, and therefore possessing the legal dignity, they were competent to receive and execute papal commands. Benedict XIV granted prelates of the greater presidency the privilege of wearing a hat with purple band, which right they hold even after they have ceased to be abbreviators. Suppression. The college was suppressed in 1908 by Pope Pius X, and their duties were transferred to the protonotarii apostolici participants.